Chapter 17. Standing on the front stoop, Bobby stared into the yellow light of the front hallway. Jennifer held the door open, her face filled with surprise. "Bobby, what's the matter?" "Oh, Bobby stammered. "Nothing. I thought I forgot my gloves." Jennifer's face relaxed. She settled back in her wheelchair. She wheeled herself back a few inches, still gripping the doorknob. "Do you want to come in and look for them?" "No," Bobby replied quickly. "I just remembered I didn't bring any gloves. Sorry." Jennifer laughed. "You're really in a state, aren't you?" "Yeah, I guess." Bobby felt totally embarrassed, and confused, and worried. Jennifer was back in her wheelchair, a small blanket over her lap. Why had Bobby imagined that she'd seen her pacing back and forth across the window? Had Bobby imagined it all? Imagined the moving shadow? Imagined the dark figure walking across the living room? "What's wrong with me?" Bobby asked herself, saying goodnight to Jennifer again, and trudging back down the gravel driveway. Her breath rose in puffs of white steam against the cold night air. But Bobby didn't feel the cold. In fact, she felt hot, feverish. Her forehead throbbed, a sharp pain just behind her eyes. Why am I seeing things? Am I seeing things? Am I cracking up? Really cracking up? The headlights seemed to skip and dance as she drove through the silent darkness back to her house on Fear Street. The house was dark except for the porch light. She realized everyone must have gone to bed. Tossing her jacket onto the banister, she hurried up to her bedroom and, without turning on the light, shook Corky awake. "Huh?" Corky cried out, frightened, and sat up stiffly. "It's me," Bobby whispered. "Wake up." "You scared me to death," Corky cried angrily. She never liked to be awakened. Bobby clicked on the bedside lamp. "I saw Jennifer walk," she blurted out. Corky yawned. "Huh? I think I saw Jennifer walk. I'm not sure, but—" "What time is it?" Corky asked crankily. "You must have been dreaming." "No, I wasn't asleep," Bobby insisted. "I was standing outside her house. I saw shadows." Corky stretched, turned, and lowered her feet to the floor. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from over her eyes. "You saw shadows?" Her face filled with concern. "Bobby, I'm really worried about you." "No, really, I saw her," Bobby said, not realizing that she was almost shouting. She stood over her sister, her hands knotted tensely in front of her, feeling hot and trembly, the pain still pulsing behind her eyes. "Maybe we should tell Mom and Dad," Corky said, glancing at the bedside clock. "I mean, just stop and think for a minute, Bobby. First you told me you saw all the lockers at school open and close when you walked down the hall. Then you told me you were paralyzed at practice this afternoon. You couldn't move. You couldn't even speak. And that's why I let Kimmy fall. But, Corky—" "Let me finish," Corky said sharply, holding up a hand as if to fend Bobby off. "Then there was that weird story about Chip, about how he froze too, and couldn't move. And now you come home from Jennifer's, and—" "But it's true," Bobby cried. "It's all true. I mean, I think it's true. Don't you believe me, Corky?" Corky was holding her hands over her ears. "Stop shouting. You're screaming right in my face." "Sorry. Let's go tell everything to Mom and Dad," Corky urged. "I really think you have to go talk to a doctor or something. I think you need help, Bobby. I really do." "You don't believe me?" Bobby accused heatedly, bitterly, her head throbbing. "You don't believe me!" Without thinking about it, she picked up Corky's pillow and heaved it at her angrily. "Hey!" Corky cried, grabbing the pillow and tossing it back in its place. "Just don't talk to me," Bobby snapped. "Traitor!" "Oh, fine!" Corky screamed. "That's just fine with me. You're crazy, Bobby. Crazy!" Bobby stormed over to her closet. "Shut up. Just shut up. Don't talk to me. Ever again." She began to tear off her clothes, tossing them on the closet floor, muttering to herself. Corky punched her pillow, fluffed it, and slid back under the covers, turning her back on her sister. "She's gone totally crazy," she told herself. "She's just so weird." Imagine calling me a traitor because I think she should talk to someone and get help. Me, a traitor. And now she's gotten me so upset, I'll probably be up all night. I hate her. I really hate her, Corky thought darkly, struggling to get comfortable. She just makes me so mad. Corky might have been more sympathetic. She might have been more understanding, more caring, more believing. But Corky had no way of knowing that this was the last night she would ever spend with her sister. Part 3. The Evil. Chapter 18. Okay, everyone, some aerobics to warm up. Bobby trotted enthusiastically onto the gym floor, clapping her hands, trying to get the girls up for their after-school practice. But they lingered against the wall, clustered in pairs, talking quietly. Come on, everyone, line up, let's warm up. Bobby's eyes wandered from girl to girl. Where's Corky, she wondered, and then remembered that Corky had to stay late in Mr. Grant's science lab. She saw Jennifer wheel herself in, concentrating as she maneuvered her wheelchair through the double doors. Jennifer saw Bobby and smiled, giving her a little wave. Line up, Bobby insisted. Where's Miss Green? Kimmy asked, stepping forward slowly, holding her wrist with the white cast on it awkwardly. I don't know, Bobby told her. Are you going to warm up with us? Or does your wrist? My wrist is of no concern of yours, Kimmy snapped. I'm not quitting the squad because of it, if that's what you mean. Her eyes burned angrily into Bobby's. Let's warm up. Come on, everyone, Bobby called out, ignoring Kimmy's anger. Slowly, the girls moved away from the wall and formed a line in front of Bobby. Bobby started up the tape player. They began their aerobic exercises, the same routine they had followed since school began. But they performed half-heartedly, grudgingly, without enthusiasm. Come on, let's work up a sweat, Bobby cried, working doubly hard, as if to make up for their feeble effort. But the girls ignored her. Deborah and Ronnie, she saw, were carrying on a conversation while going through the motions. Bobby glanced toward the wall. Jennifer gave her a thumbs up, but it didn't cheer her. The girls, she knew, were deliberately not cooperating. She stopped the music. Let's work on steam heat, she suggested. Ronnie, do you want to take the end this time? Huh? Do you want to take the end? You can lead it? I don't know, Ronnie shrugged. Whatever. She turned back to her conversation with Deborah. Without Corky, I don't have anyone on my side, Bobby realized, suddenly overcome by a powerful wave of depression. Only Jennifer, I guess. But even she doesn't want to speak up for me in front of the girls. Not after what happened to Kimmy. Okay, line up for steam heat, Bobby called out, struggling to keep up a show of enthusiasm. I think we should wait for Miss Green, Kimmy said defiantly. Yeah, let's wait, Deborah added quickly. No reason to wait, Bobby said unsteadily. She glanced up at the scoreboard clock. 3:45. We know what we have to work on, don't we? I still think we should wait, Kimmy said, a definite challenge to Bobby's authority. Heather and Megan nodded in solemn agreement. It's a mutiny, Bobby realized, suddenly dizzy. Line up, she insisted, glancing at Jennifer, whose smile had faded. She was watching the proceedings with a look of concern. Kimmy, if you have something to say to me, Bobby started. I think Miss Green has something to say to you, Kimmy replied smugly. Beside her, Ronnie snickered out loud. The double doors swung open and Miss Green entered, taking long, rapid strides, carrying a bulging briefcase. Sorry I'm late, she called out, heading to her office in a corner. Seeing them on the floor, Bobby by herself in front of the sullen-looking group, Miss Green stopped. You've started? Not exactly, Kimmy told her, shooting Bobby a meaningful glance. No one seems to be in the mood to work today, Bobby reported reluctantly. Miss Green shifted the heavy briefcase to her other hand. Bobby, could I see you in my office for a minute? Yeah, sure, Bobby replied, dread building in the pit of her stomach, her throat tightening. Everyone, let's cancel practice for today, okay? Miss Green said, her eyes on Kimmy. Uh-oh, Bobby thought. She could feel the blood pulsing at her temples. We'll regroup tomorrow afternoon, Miss Green said. Talking quietly among themselves, the cheerleaders obediently moved off the floor and began to collect their belongings. Bobby realized that all of them were avoiding looking at her. She caught a smug grin on Kimmy's face, but Kimmy quickly turned her head and walked away with Deborah and Ronnie. They all know what Miss Green is going to say to me, Bobby realized, and I know too. As the gym quickly emptied out, Bobby followed Miss Green to her office, her heart pounding, her legs suddenly feeling as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. Miss Green dropped the briefcase onto her desk. She sifted through a few pink phone message sheets, then looked up at Bobby. Health forms, she said, patting the briefcase. They weigh a ton. You've got to be strong in the phys ed department. Bobby stood awkwardly in front of the desk, nervously toying with a strand of her hair. When Miss Green motioned her toward a seat, Bobby obediently lowered herself into it, folding her hands in her lap. She realized she was perspiring. It was so hot in the gym, and she had been the only one to really work during the aerobics warm-ups. Bobby, I'm really sorry, Miss Green said abruptly, setting down the pink message sheets and leaning with both hands on the desktop. I have to ask you to step down from the squad. Oh? Bobby uttered a short cry. She had anticipated those very words, but somehow they had come as a surprise anyway. I really don't, she started. Miss Green held up a hand to silence her. I don't want to discuss what happened yesterday. I know you wouldn't deliberately try to injure one of the girls, but what happened happened. Whether it was a loss of concentration or whatever, it happened. She sat down, leaning forward over the desk, playing with an opal ring on her right hand. You're a very talented cheerleader, Bobby, she continued. You and your sister. I like you both. But after yesterday, I'm afraid you've lost the confidence of the squad. Confidence? Bobby managed to utter in a tight, choked voice. She suddenly realized she was breathing hard. Drops of perspiration were sliding down her forehead, but she made no attempt to wipe them away. A squad is built on trust, and the girls just don't feel they can trust you, Miss Green said, lowering her voice, her face expressionless. They've made it very clear to me. Whether it's true or not, they believe that you deliberately didn't catch Kimmy yesterday. She cleared her throat noisily, covering her mouth with one hand. I'm really sorry, Bobby. I have no choice. I have to ask you to quit. Bobby lowered her head, struggling to stop her body from shaking, struggling to hold back her tears. I understand, she managed to whisper. If you'd like to talk to someone, Miss Green offered, her eyes sympathetic. A doctor, I mean. If you'd like me to recommend someone you could confide in. Bobby rose to her feet. She had to get out of there, she realized. She felt hot and cold and shaky and sick. No thanks, I'll just leave now, she said, turning to the door, avoiding Miss Green's stare. I know how you must feel, Miss Green said, standing too. If there's anything I can do. A few seconds later, Bobby found herself in a locker room, alone, her footsteps echoing on the damp concrete floor. She choked back a sob. I'm wringing wet. I'll take a shower, she decided. Change into street clothes. That'll make me feel better. She thought she heard a scraping sound from another row of lockers. Anybody here? She called in a quivery voice. No reply. Now I'm hearing things too, she said out loud. Oh well, she thought, pulling her sweatshirt over her head. At least now I'll have more time to study. With that thought, the sobs she'd been holding back burst out. How could this happen to me? How could this happen? Am I really going crazy? Leaving her clothes on the bench, she pulled a towel from her locker and padded over the damp floor toward the shower room. A warm shower would be soothing, she decided. She'd make it nice and hot. It would stop the trembling, stop the chills down her back. She turned at the entrance to the showers, thinking she heard someone again. She listened. Again, silence. She stepped into the large shower room with its stained tile walls, its row of chrome shower heads. The floor was puddled with cold water, left over from last period gym class. Bobby shivered. I'm so cold. So cold. As she reached up to turn on the water, metal doors nearby slammed shut with a clang. Huh? At first, Bobby wasn't sure what had happened. She jumped, startled by the loud, unexpected noise. Maybe someone had entered the dressing area outside, she decided. But then she saw that the shower room doors had been closed. That's weird, she thought. She turned on the water and screamed as scalding water burst out of the shower head with a roar, striking her chest, her shoulders. Ow! She dodged away, but the next shower head was spraying down hot water too, scalding hot, burning hot. Help! All the showers were turned on now, scalding hot water shooting out of all of them. Something's wrong, Bobby realized, stumbling back in a panic, her chest burning, her legs burning. Something's terribly wrong. Ow! She slipped and toppled backward, landing with a splash in a steaming puddle. Help! Scrambling to her feet, she saw that the hot water was rising rapidly. The drain appeared to be clogged. Ow! The water was nearly an inch deep already, and so hot it burned her feet. The steam rose like a thick, choking curtain. Gasping in the hot, wet air, Bobby lunged for the doors. She tugged on the handles. Hey! They wouldn't move. Hey! She struggled to push open the doors, but they were stuck, or locked. Hey! The steam was thick. She felt as if her lungs were burning, filling up. It was so hard to breathe. Crying out from the pain of the scalding water, she hopped back to the wall of shower heads, reached out for the first control knob, turned it, turned. To her horror, the water didn't slow, didn't get colder. Frantically, she turned another knob, another. Ow! She couldn't shut them off. I can't breathe. The steam was so thick, so hot. I can't see. She slipped, stumbling back to the double doors. Help me! She choked out a desperate cry. Somebody, help! The water was up over her ankles. Why wouldn't it drain? She danced wildly, a dance of unbearable pain. Help me! I can't breathe! The rush of water became a roar. She closed her eyes and covered her ears. The roar didn't go away. The pain didn't go away. The roar grew louder. Then all was silence. Chapter 19. Where'd everyone go? Corky wondered. She stepped into the gym, shifting her backpack to her other shoulder. Anyone here? She called, her voice echoing against the high ceiling. Her sneakers squeaked on the shiny, polished floor. She glanced up at the scoreboard clock. Not even 4:30. Practice usually lasted until 5, she knew. So where was everyone? Had they moved the practice outdoors? Sometimes they did that on nice days. It was good to practice in the stadium, get some fresh air, get out of the gym, which was usually stifling hot. But it was gray and blustery outside today, not a day for an outdoor practice. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way to Miss Green's office and peered in through the big glass window. Empty. The papers all neatly stacked on one corner of the desk, the chair pushed in. I guess practice ended early for some reason, Corky thought, shaking her head. Well, Bobby must be glad. She wasn't in any mood to face the girls anyway. Bobby. I wanted to talk to her, to make up, Corky thought. She pushed open the door to the locker room and stuck her head inside. Bobby? Anyone? The locker room seemed empty too. She was about to close the door when she heard the sound of rushing water. Someone's taking a shower, she decided. She made her way into the locker room, warmer and steamier than usual, through a row of lockers. She spotted someone's clothes tossed onto one of the long benches that stretched in front of the lockers. On the other side of the lockers, she could hear the rush of shower water going full force. She picked up the sweatshirt, recognized it as Bobby's. So Bobby was taking a shower. By herself? Where were the other girls? This didn't make any sense. Corky took a step toward the shower room, then stopped. She had spotted something on the floor under Bobby's things. Something shiny. She bent down and picked it up, bringing it up close to her face to examine it. It was Kimmy's silver pendant, the shiny little megaphone. It must have fallen off again, Corky decided. She rolled it into a tissue and stuffed it into the pocket of her jeans. I'll have to remember to return it to her. She walked past the lockers, turned toward the shower room, then stopped in surprise. The shower doors were closed. Weird, she thought. The shower doors were never closed. She didn't even know they could close. As Corky drew nearer, the rush of water on the other side of the door grew louder. Could one shower make all that noise? She wondered. She knocked on the metal door. Hey, Bobby! No reply. Bobby? She pounded harder. She can't hear me over the water, Corky decided. She put a hand on each of the 2 door handles and pulled. The doors swung open easily. Hey! Corky shrieked, as a tidal wave of hot water came spewing out at her. Whoa! Startled, she staggered back until she bumped into the side of a locker. The hot water rolled over her sneakers, washed up onto the legs of her jeans. Ow! Hey! It was boiling hot. She looked up to see thick white steam floating into the locker room, like a fog rolling over a beach. What's going on? She wondered, more angry than frightened. Who closed the doors? Where is Bobby? The steaming hot water flooded through the locker room, but it sounded as if the water had been shut off. Walking on tiptoe, Corky made her way back to the shower room. Holding onto the tile wall, she peered inside, squinting against the swirling steam, and saw Bobby, lying face down against the wall under the shower heads. Bobby? Through gaps in the parting fog, her body slowly became visible. Her arms were crumpled beneath her, her legs were folded, her hair was soaked and matted over her head and onto the floor. Her back, her legs, her skin, her entire body was as red as a lobster. Bobby? Gripped with fear, Corky plunged into the room, dropped to her knees in the scalding water. Bobby? With a loud gasp, She reached down and pulled her sister's head up by the hair. "Bobby? Bobby, please?" Bobby stared back at her with vacant, wide-eyed terror, her flesh swollen and red, her mouth locked open in a silent scream. "Bobby?" No. No answer. The heavy steam settled over Corky, making her shiver. Holding her sister tightly in her arms, Corky knew that Bobby would never answer her again. Chapter 20. A pearly full moon seemed to hover over the Fear Street Cemetery, casting pale, ghostly light over the jagged tombstones. Trees whispered and shook their nearly lifeless branches in a cold, gusting wind. Corky slipped on wet leaves, and she nearly lost her balance. A light rain had just ended, leaving the weed-choked ground between the graves soft and muddy. Like quicksand, she thought. She had a sudden picture of sinking into the ground, of being pulled down, down, until only her head poked out, and then it too would be sucked into the mud to join the corpses. Something slithered through the clump of dead leaves near her feet. A squirrel? A mouse? Even in a graveyard there are living things, she thought. She shivered and dug her bare hands deeper into her coat pockets. The wind died down as she made her way along the path through the old section of graves. Bobby was buried in a new section up a little hill, away from the street. Corky knew the way well. The old tombstones, poking up from the ground like rotting teeth, cast long shadows on the ground at Corky's feet. At the end of the first row she stopped. Why did the stone on the end look familiar? Creeping closer, her boots sinking into the mud, Corky read the inscription, Sarah Fear, 1875 to 1899. Sarah Fear, Corky said aloud, staring at the carved name. She suddenly remembered. This was the grave that Jennifer had been found sprawled on that horrible night she had been thrown from the bus. Sarah Fear. And what were these 4 stones behind Sarah Fear's grave? Moving closer, Corky leaned down to read the low stones. The names had been worn off over the years, but the dates were clearly readable. They had all died in the same year, 1899. 4 grave markers with the same year that Sarah Fear had died. What had happened, Corky wondered. Had Sarah Fear's entire family been wiped out at once? People died so young back then, Corky thought, climbing back to her feet. Sarah Fear would have only been 24. Without realizing it, she uttered a loud sob. Bobby was only 17. Hands shoved in her jacket pockets, Corky turned away from the old graves and made her way along the familiar path up to the new section. The wind picked up again, cold and wet. She could hear a dog howling mournfully somewhere down the block. The trees shivered their wintry limbs. Dead leaves scattered as if trying to flee. "Here I am again," Corky said, placing a hand on top of her sister's temporary marker. "You're probably getting tired of seeing me." How many times had Corky visited her sister's grave since the funeral 2 weeks before? Nearly every day? "I just miss you so much," Corky whispered, holding on to the cold marker, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. She thought about the funeral, saw it all again. The flowers, so bright and colorful and out of place on that gray, mournful day. Her parents, holding hands, leaning against each other, hiding their faces so outsiders couldn't see their pain. Again, Corky saw the cheerleaders, huddled together, silent and pale. Jennifer stayed by herself in the wheelchair, a wool blanket over her legs, tears trickling down her cheeks. Chip had been there too, looking awkward and uncomfortable. He had been nice to Corky, tried to say something comforting, but ended up stammering about how sorry he was and hurrying off. And Kimmy. Kimmy had been there too, standing a little way off from the other cheerleaders, her arms crossed tightly in front of her, her expression grim, unchanging, her eyes on Chip. A cold drizzle had begun to fall when they lowered Bobby's coffin into the ground. Corky felt her mother's arms go around her and Sean. They were all weeping, she realized, their tears dropping into the open grave. Corky had looked up through tear-clouded eyes to see Kimmy again, still staring at Chip. And then, as the drizzle turned to a hard, steady rain, people started to leave, pushing up their coat collars, ducking under black umbrellas. Jennifer's father appeared and wheeled her away. Chip had hurried off, taking long, awkward strides over the mud. Kimmy left with the other cheerleaders, their heads lowered, bent against the wind and rain. Corky and her family were left alone, without Bobby. Without Bobby, forever. And now it was 2 weeks later, and Corky still couldn't get used to the idea that she had no longer had her sister to talk to. "I'm back again," Corky said, turning her eyes up to the full moon. "I know you can hear me, Bobby. I just wish you could answer." Her next words caught in her throat. She stopped, took a deep breath, taking in the sweet, cold air. "I just wanted to tell you the news," she continued after a long pause. "They made Kimmy captain of the cheerleaders. You probably guessed that would happen, right? Well, everyone seems real happy about it, especially Kimmy. The news sure made her wrist get better in a hurry." Corky sighed. She rubbed her palm against the cold marker. "Everyone turns to look at me when Miss Green made the announcement," Corky continued, "as if I would throw a fit or storm out or something." And then she added bitterly, "As if I would care." She kicked away a leaf that had blown onto the leg of her jeans. "I don't care anymore, Bobby. I really don't," she said with growing emotion. "I don't know what I care about now. I just wish you were here, so that I could apologize for being mean to you the night before you died. I just wish you were here so you could tell me what happened." Corky sobbed. "What happened in that shower room? Why didn't you open the door and come out? The police say you had some kind of seizure and died instantly. I was glad you didn't suffer, but I just can't understand it. Why? How did it happen? You weren't sick. You were in great shape. What happened, Bobby? What happened?" Then she was crying, big tears rolling down her cheeks, her nose running, the sound of her own cries pushed back at her by a rush of cold wind. I'm sorry, she apologized to the silent, unanswering gravestone. "I keep coming here day after day, saying the same things. It's just... Corky shoved her hand into her jeans pocket, searching for a tissue. Digging deep, she found one balled up. She pulled it out, and saw something shiny fall out. She bent down and searched the wet ground at her feet until she found it. Then she stood to examine it. Kimmy's megaphone pendant. She had found it that day, on the locker room floor, near Bobby's clothes, on that horrible day. She had tucked it into her jeans pocket, forgotten all about it. As she stared at it, watching it gleam in the cold white moonlight, Corky realized that here was a clue. Here in her trembling hand. Kimmy had been there. Kimmy had been in the locker room, had been near Bobby's things. "Oh no," Corky said aloud, squeezing the pendant tight in her fist. "Oh no. Oh no. Did Kimmy have something to do with Bobby's death?" No one had more motive, Corky realized. No one resented Bobby more than Kimmy. In fact, it wasn't just resentment, it was hatred. Open hatred. Kimmy hated Bobby because she was cheerleader captain, because Chip had dropped Kimmy and asked Bobby out, because Bobby was pretty and blonde and talented and Kimmy wasn't, because of everything. "Yes, Kimmy was there," Corky said aloud. "Kimmy was there when Bobby died, and I have the proof in my hand." And then, without realizing it, she was running between the rows of graves, her boots sliding and slipping in the mud. With the pendant wrapped tightly in her fist, she was running down to the street, and then she was home and in the car, starting it up, the engine roaring to life, the headlights cutting through the dark night air. "I have the proof. I have the proof." And she squealed away from her house, following the curve of Fear Street, past the dark old houses, past the trembling, nearly bare trees, and turned toward Kimmy's house. A few minutes later, her heart pounding, the pendant still clutched tightly in her fist, she was staring up at the large, white-shingled house, the windows all lit up, a silver Volvo parked in the drive. Kimmy's mother opened the door, surprised to see Corky there so late, unannounced. Corky rushed past her without any explanation, tore through the front hallway, swallowing hard, gasping for air, and burst into the den. Kimmy was there with Deborah and Ronnie. "Hey!" she called out as Corky entered. "Here!" Corky screamed accusingly, unwrapped her fist, and thrust the silver megaphone pendant into Kimmy's face. Kimmy started, and her eyes grew wide with surprise. Chapter 21. "It's my proof!" Corky cried. Ronnie jumped to her feet. Deborah stared up at Corky from the floor, a notebook in her lap. "My proof!" Corky repeated, holding the pendant in front of Kimmy's startled face. "Where'd you get it?" Kimmy asked, locking her eyes onto Corky's. "You left it somewhere," Corky said, shaking all over from her anger. "Huh? You left it somewhere, and now it's my proof," Corky exclaimed. "Corky, are you okay?" Ronnie asked. moving over to her and putting a hand gently on her trembling shoulder. "You'd better sit down," Deborah said, closing her notebook. "You don't look very well." Corky pulled away from Ronnie's hand. "You were there. You were there when Bobby died," she snarled, staring accusingly at Kimmy. Kimmy's mouth dropped open, but she didn't reply. "Here's my proof," Corky said, waving the pendant in Kimmy's face. "Listen to Deborah," Kimmy said finally. "Sit down." She pointed to the couch. "You're not making any sense, Corky." "I found this in the locker room," Corky said, ignoring Kimmy's words. "On the day Bobby died. I found it on the floor. I found it." "Corky, please," Kimmy insisted. "Sit down. Let me get you something hot to drink. You're shaking like a leaf." "Don't change the subject," Corky screamed, realizing she was out of control, not caring at all. "I have the proof, Kimmy. I have the proof. I found your pendant under Bobby's things." Kimmy's expression changed from surprise to concern. "Corky," she said softly, "that pendant isn't mine."